And I truly believe that, and I believe change begins right here in Person County, where we reside.
All right, so now the next challenge that you are approaching is the attempt to run for school board.
Yes, sir.
Why are you running for school board? What do you see that you feel you can have an impact on?
So let me say, as I said, I worked for the North Carolina Department of Public Safety as well as Virginia Department of Corrections. And it was when I worked for Virginia's department where I began to study recidivism, the rate in the state. And there is when I discovered the school to prison pipeline and a lot of the inequalities that we see in education. And not to speak to the Person County school system directly, but in this particular county, we are one of the only counties in the state where all of the school board members are educators or former educators. But when I speak about equity, in education, I can use a prime example. If we take a student from a high income neighborhood versus a student living in a low income neighborhood, and even though it's a school system, we say we're giving them equal opportunity, we're giving them equal access. I think we have to understand that fairness has to be across the board, that we just can't give them equal access, but we must cater to that particular situation. And that is what I mean when I say equity, to make sure all students receive fairness across the board. That's not only when it comes to education, but also in their behavior, when it comes to out of school suspension, when it comes to mental health, because I think a lot of times we take all negative behavior to be negative behavior. When we think about students that come from a low income area and students that come from a high income area, when they come to school, even though they have the equal opportunity, even though the teachers are teaching the same curriculum to both students, we're all taught the same, but we don't all learn the same. And there are students that come from low income areas that come to school and their environment at home is not even conducive enough for them to come to school to be worried about a science test or a math test because of the struggle they have going on at home. And I want to suggest that even in the midst of COVID-19, students already had enough dealings of their own that cause trauma or social or emotional problems. And to add COVID-19 on top of that, I think can be very dangerous and devastating to our youth. And when we speak of education and inequalities, again, not to speak directly to the school system here, but I believe that all teachers and staff should be trained on racial equity and racial equality and on anti-racism. The reason being because racial injustice and social injustice is on the forefront of our society. Everywhere we look, we see racial injustice, we see social injustice, and it's everywhere. It's in our sports, it's in news, it's on the radio, it's in our music, it's everywhere we look. And to ignore that it exists, I think shuts off all avenues for any kind of solution. And teachers have to be able to understand, identify, and relate to the plight of all students. Many teachers or instructors may say, in my classroom, I don't see color. But I would disagree with that because we need to see color, because we need to be able to understand the plight of where our students come from and what they have going on outside of education, what we can do to bridge the gap from the community to the school system, because education has been that lifeline, has been that safety net for a lot of students to come out of those low income and impoverished neighborhoods. I often say education is a tool needed to build prosperity, especially for minorities, when inequalities and racism and segregation is all around us. We may no longer have the sheets of racism, but there's no doubt racism still exists, especially in a county like Person County where racism runs completely deep. I will have you all to know that if you go to Raleigh, to the North Carolina Museum of History, the only thing you'll see about Person County is a KKK mask. And even the demographics in this county and in our school system are fearful for this training even more. And I believe our parents and our community will feel safer knowing that our teachers have been equipped and trained to deal with this racial injustice or this social injustice that we see going on all around us. Because whether we admit it or not, we all have a bias, whether it's intentional or unintentional. We all have discriminations against certain groups of people, whether it's intentional or not. And I think as a school system, we should be held accountable and we should be equipped and trained to deal with the plight of all of our students that's going on around us in this country.
Great response. But now to the question of are you prepared? What would your answer be? Are you yourself prepared for the tasks of the school board? What would your answer be to that question?
I would say yes, I'm prepared. I'm excited, a little nervous at the same time, but I'm assured that when you do the right thing, that God is pleased, and in return that hopefully we'll be able to see the results of the change that we're trying to be. I want to say this about this particular generation that's different from the generations of old. I believe this generation that we are living in right now is the prophecy of the prophets that spoke in the 1960s, like John Lewis and like Dr. Martin Luther King. This generation, they're rowing a different way, but it's effective, and they're rowing in the right direction. And I truly believe that, and I believe change begins right here in Person County, where we reside.
What was your spiritual process like in talking to God and discovering whether you really should do this or not?
Well, I will say I struggle with that, and I still struggle with that to this day, on how to almost mix up religion and politics, almost. But then I read where the Reverend Dr. Gordon C. Taylor once said, he said, the job of the preacher is to have a Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the other hand, which means you ought to always be ready to stand up for somebody else's rights, to be the voice for the voiceless, and to be the voice of somebody in the community for the schools.
So what kind of situation is that presented for you as a parent, trying to get your kindergartner used to school, even though school right now is not normal for anybody? This is not normal school.
Right. I believe he understands the plight of COVID-19. It's been 6 months, so he understands the necessary precautions needed to prevent the spread of the disease. What I'm concerned about all over the county, face-to-face schooling is a great option, because some parents and some students, as a matter of fact, need that social and emotional connection with students and with teachers, and some students can only learn face-to-face. But what I'm concerned about is about a lot of students that are 100% virtual, and how they tend to fall behind because they don't have the support at home needed to make them successful academically. And so that is one of my concerns for students that are virtually learning. Are they going to fall behind? Is the achievement gap going to be destroyed because of this pandemic? I don't believe that any child should be left behind or during COVID-19. So I think as a school system, we should do whatever we need. This is what I mean when I speak of equity, because there are some children and some low-income environments and some bad places in this county, and they need the support of the school system. Many people say, well, how can the school system help home life? How can they help somebody's economical situation? And as I said earlier, education has been a safety net, not only for myself, but for a lot of other students that come through the Person County school system. And on the school board, we need representation that will represent the plight of that disenfranchised or that disinherited child.
Okay. Now, I'll ask this. How can the church be of assistance to what it is that you're speaking of with equity in education?
Well, I will say, when it comes to any community issue, depending on the church culture, I would say the church has an uphill battle, especially here in Person County, because the church hasn't always voiced its opinion when it should have, and it has remained quiet and silent in times it should have spoke up. So I will say the church has an uphill battle when it comes to any community involvement, but the church could definitely assist us in bringing forth this equity in education to make sure all students of all color, all races, all disabilities, from all neighborhoods, all zip codes in this county are treated fairly.
Okay. And lastly, is there anything else that you want to add or mention as it pertains to some of your experiences as a pastor and as now someone who's looking to be a part of the school board here in Person County?
I would just say that we have to be the change that we want to see. We just can't march, we just can't scream, we just can't curse, but we have to get out, we have to do something. It was John Lewis that said, when we see something wrong, we must stand up, we must speak out, we must do something, we must get in good trouble. And I believe that sometimes that's what we have to do in order to affect change in a place where change is not prevalent. And so as a pastor, I'm going to use my platform and my voice and my experiences to try to make that change happen here in Person County, for our teachers, for our parents and for our students. I spoke earlier this morning. I was talking about how not only do our students need cultural equity, but our teachers as well need economic equity, and they need to be paid properly for what they do here in our county for our students.